Hello everyone, and welcome to Voices Behind Reddit. Here we bring you the best stories from Reddit where real experiences and captivating tales come to life. Let's get started.
Imagine one day receiving a package that doesn't just turn your life upside down. It completely shatters the world you thought you knew. For Alex Bennett, that day arrived on a cool fall evening. He remembers it vividly because that package, a seemingly innocent manila envelope from private investigator Lisa Thompson, was about to turn his life into a living nightmare. Alex's hand shook as he held it, feeling the weight of something much darker than paper inside. In his heart, he knew whatever was in there was going to change everything. Up until that moment, Alex thought he understood his life. He thought he knew his wife, Rachel, his best friend, his partner, the mother of his children. They had shared a decade together, raising two beautiful kids, Jordan and Emma, and building a life that felt like a solid, unwavering commitment. But deep down, he had started to notice cracks, small things. A stray phone call she took in another room, her quick getaways under the pretense of business trips, and a subtle but growing distance in her eyes. Little signs that seemed so insignificant on their own, but when added up, painted a picture he wasn't ready to face. But he ignored them. We all do that, don't we? When you're married, you want to trust, you want to believe. It's what keeps the whole thing together. And when you have children, it becomes even more critical. That foundation of trust that you think is unshakable. But now, holding this envelope in his hands, Alex felt that foundation crack. He had spent countless nights wondering, pushing down that uneasy feeling in his gut, reassuring himself that his suspicions were probably just a sign of stress. But in this moment, those reassurances melted away, leaving only raw fear and anger. Taking a deep breath, he braced himself and opened the envelope. Inside, he found pages of reports, documents, and, worst of all, photographs. There was his wife, Rachel, with another man. And not just any man, but her former boss, Mark Hayward. They weren't just casual photos. No, these were images filled with intimacy, the kind that cut straight through his heart. They revealed an undeniable connection, a familiarity that made Alex's stomach churn. The life he thought he had, the trust, the love, the loyalty, was being torn apart, one photograph at a time. Alex's mind spun, reeling from the shock. It felt like a slow motion horror movie, each image dragging him further down into a place he didn't want to be. And with every page, the truth became more devastating. This wasn't a recent affair. It wasn't a mistake that had just happened out of the blue. This had been going on for years. 9 years to be exact. 9 years of secrets and lies, all while he had been living his life, trusting her, building a family, believing in a future that he now realized had been shattered long ago. In that moment, he felt betrayed, lost, and somehow embarrassed. How had he missed this? How had he let it go on for so long without seeing the signs? All those subtle changes in Rachel's behavior, the times she seemed distant, the little lies that he had brushed off as stress or work. Now, they all screamed back at him. He had been so wrapped up in life and work and their kids, in the belief that their love was real and solid, that he hadn't heard those warning bells ringing louder and louder. He remembered a night a few months back when Rachel had gone on one of her business trips. He had called her to check in, and she had sounded distracted, distant, as if she was somewhere else entirely. At the time, he had chalked it up to work stress, telling himself that she was just tired. But now, as he looked back, he could see it clearly. She wasn't tired from work. She was with him, with Mark. The realization cut deep, leaving him feeling hollow and deceived. He thought about his children, Jordan and Emma, and a pang of guilt and anger hit him. This betrayal wasn't just his to bear. It was going to ripple out and impact their lives too. Jordan had always been close to his mom, always waiting for her to come home from her trips, always excited to show her what he had drawn that day. Emma, on the other hand, was younger and might not understand everything, but she would feel it. Children are intuitive. They pick up on the tension, on the silent battles. Alex knew that no matter how this all unfolded, their lives would be touched by this deception, and he dreaded the moment they would start asking questions. Overwhelmed, Alex knew he couldn't face this alone. He wasn't ready to confront Rachel yet, and he wasn't even sure he could look at her the same way after seeing those photos. So instead, he turned back to Lisa, the private investigator, seeking more answers, hoping for some guidance on what to do next. Lisa, who had become somewhat of a lifeline, had been compassionate and thorough in her investigation. She had noticed his reluctance to dig deeper at first, but as the truth started to unfold, she had encouraged him to look at everything with open eyes. Now he needed her expertise more than ever. What had started as a gnawing suspicion in the back of his mind had turned into a full-blown avalanche, a cascade of revelations that left him questioning everything he had ever known. And he was only beginning to understand the extent of the lies, the layers of deceit that Rachel had carefully constructed over the years. It was as if his entire world had been held together by a web of lies, and now, piece by piece, it was all falling apart. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty: his life was forever changed. The path ahead was murky, full of pain, anger, and uncertainty, but he had no choice but to walk it. For his children, for himself, he had to face the darkness, confront the betrayal, and figure out how to rebuild piece by piece. This was just the beginning, and Alex could feel it in his bones. The journey ahead was going to test every part of him he once thought was strong, and he wasn't sure he would ever be the same again. Alex Bennett's life, as he knew it, was crumbling, but he couldn't afford to fall apart. Not yet. Not until he knew the full truth. As he sat with the photographs and reports scrawled out in front of him, Alex realized he needed answers. Real, honest answers that Rachel had been hiding for nearly a decade. So he called Lisa, the private investigator, hoping for clarity but bracing himself for even more pain. Lisa's voice was calm but firm when she answered. She had seen situations like this before. The unraveling of lives, the cold truths that people sometimes try so desperately to hide. Alex hesitated, feeling the weight of the question he was about to ask, but finally he managed to speak. Lisa, how long has this been going on? Is there more I don't know? Lisa's response hit him like a ton of bricks. Alex, I don't think you're prepared for everything I've uncovered, but yes, there's more. She paused, giving him a moment to process before continuing. It wasn't just the few meetings you saw in those photographs. Rachel and Mark have been involved for over 9 years. From what I've gathered, they were together before you even had Emma. 9 years. Those two words echoed in Alex's mind, twisting and turning until they felt like a vise around his chest. 9 years? That was nearly half of their marriage. He could almost feel the years slipping through his fingers, every holiday, every birthday, every memory now tainted by Rachel's betrayal. Lisa, he said, his voice barely a whisper, did she ever bring him around the kids? Was he involved in their lives too? There was a silence on the other end, a silence that was answer enough. But Lisa eventually responded, her tone laced with caution. From what I could find, Mark was careful not to interfere directly with your family life. But there were times, Alex, times when Rachel would take trips with him and, well, let's just say she didn't always have an excuse to give. Those words crushed him. Alex couldn't help but think back to the nights he had spent alone, waiting for Rachel to return from her so-called business trips. He had always believed her, never questioning her long absences. And now he realized those nights were spent with Mark, in places he couldn't even bring himself to imagine. As Lisa continued sharing details, Alex's mind drifted to his children, Jordan and Emma. They were his world, his reason for everything, and he felt an overwhelming need to protect them from the storm that was crashing down on their lives. Jordan was just entering his teenage years, and Emma was still young and impressionable. How could he tell them? How could he explain to them that their mother, the woman they looked up to, trusted, loved unconditionally, had been living a double life? With a deep breath, Alex knew he needed to do something he had never imagined. He needed to find out if Jordan and Emma were truly his. The thought alone made his stomach churn, but he knew he couldn't live with any more lies, not after everything he had already discovered. The idea of a DNA test was a gut punch, a final insult in a series of blows, but he had to know. He couldn't risk leaving another stone unturned. As he hung up with Lisa, he felt his heart heavy with despair but oddly calm. It was like he had hit rock bottom, and there was nowhere lower to go. The next steps, painful as they might be, were necessary. He scheduled the DNA test for the kids, feeling a pang of guilt as he thought about the look in their eyes if they ever found out. But at this point, truth was his only path forward, no matter how dark it might be. Waiting for the results was a kind of torture Alex hadn't anticipated. Each day felt like a weight pressing down on his chest, each hour dragging on with a sense of dread he couldn't shake. He would watch Jordan and Emma, trying to memorize every detail about them, wondering if he might lose even the certainty of being their father. And in those quiet moments, he would think about how much of himself he had poured into their lives. All the soccer practices, bedtime stories, the scraped knees, the shared laughs. They were his kids in every way that mattered, but the waiting, the not knowing, was tearing him apart. One evening, as they all sat around the dinner table, Alex felt his heart break a little more. Emma was chattering about her school day, Jordan cracking a joke about a funny incident in class, and Rachel, across the table, was smiling as if nothing had changed. But for Alex, everything had. Every word, every look, every smile felt forced, like an act he had to play to keep the kids from seeing the truth simmering just below the surface. He knew he had to confront her, but the timing had to be right. He had to stay calm, keep his emotions in check, and make sure he wasn't going to lash out in front of the kids. When he finally got the DNA results back, his hand shook as he opened the envelope. He had tried to prepare himself for anything, but the fear still gnawed at him, whispering that he might be about to lose the only real family he had left. But as he read through the document, a single tear slipped down his face. They were his. Jordan and Emma were his, and nothing would ever change that. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, he felt a flicker of relief, a small crack of light in the darkness. But he knew that the battle was far from over. Rachel's betrayal had thrown him into an ocean of pain and uncertainty, but his children were the anchor he would cling to. For them, he would fight through this. For them, he would find a way forward, no matter how impossible it seemed. And as he looked around his home, the memories still raw and fresh, he made a promise to himself. No matter what happened next, no matter what Rachel would say or do, he would be there for Jordan and Emma. They were his heart, his purpose, and he would never let them suffer because of their mother's choices. For them, he would hold his head high, even if he had to face the darkest parts of himself to do it. The initial shock was something Alex thought he could never get over. But as days turned into weeks, he realized this betrayal wasn't just about him and Rachel. It was seeping into every corner of his life, spreading a shadow over his family, his children, and even his health. The kids were beginning to notice that something was off. Jordan, always the curious one, had started asking questions, trying to understand the tension between his parents. "Dad, are you okay?" He'd asked one night, his young eyes wide with worry. Alex could barely look him in the eyes as he forced a smile, saying something vague about work stress. But deep down, he knew he couldn't keep up this charade forever. And Emma, sweet and innocent, seemed blissfully unaware, but would sometimes cling to him a little longer at bedtime, sensing that he needed the comfort as much as she did. Every time he looked at his children, a pang of guilt washed over him. He had promised himself he'd protect them from harm, but now he felt like he was failing them. Their world was about to change, and there was no way around it. Rachel's actions had left scars that couldn't be hidden, no matter how much he tried to shield them. And then, as if the emotional toll wasn't enough, another fear crept into Alex's mind: his health. Rachel's betrayal didn't just risk their family, it had put his physical well-being in jeopardy. He hated the thought, hated to even consider it, but he couldn't ignore the possibility. Rachel had been involved with another man, someone he didn't know or trust, and who had his own history of affairs. The risk was there looming, and he couldn't just hope it would go away. The thought of going to a doctor, of having to explain why he needed those tests, was almost too much to bear. He felt humiliated, reduced to a man who couldn't even trust the person he had loved for years. But as painful as it was, Alex knew he had to do it. He couldn't put his children at risk, couldn't ignore the reality that Rachel's choices had created. So he went sitting alone in the sterile waiting room, feeling exposed and vulnerable, waiting to hear if he was carrying anything that could harm him or worse, his children. Those days of waiting were some of the hardest he'd ever experienced. Every moment stretched, every sound in the house seemed amplified, every look Rachel gave him a reminder of everything she destroyed. He tried to keep his mind occupied, focusing on work or keeping the house running smoothly for the kids. But inside he was unraveling, each passing hour pulling him further into despair. As he waited for the test results, he couldn't shake the fear that this wasn't the last betrayal he would uncover. Rachel's long absences, her endless excuses. What else had she hidden? He started wondering if his children, Jordan and Emma, had been affected in ways he hadn't seen. He thought back to family moments, birthday parties, holidays, school events, had she been thinking of Mark even then, and had his kids sensed something wrong all along. One evening, as Alex sat alone in the quiet of the house, he made a decision. He couldn't let Rachel's actions poison his life any more than they already had. He had to be proactive, take steps to protect his family, whatever that might mean. So he called Lisa again, asking her to dig deeper, to find out if there were other things Rachel had kept hidden. And then, almost as an afterthought, he requested something he never thought he'd have to ask for: a DNA test for his children. It wasn't that he doubted them. Jordan and Emma were his entire world. They were his kids in every way that mattered. But he needed peace of mind. If there was one more secret buried in this mess he needed to know. It was about truth now, and he couldn't keep walking on eggshells, afraid of what he might find. The day he received the results was a bittersweet one. His health test came back clear, a wave of relief washing over him as he realized that, at least in this way, he had been spared. The DNA results felt different, more personal. When he opened that envelope, his hands shook as they had when he first received that package from Lisa. But this time, the outcome was one he could hold on to. Jordan and Emma were his, through and through. And though it didn't erase the pain of everything else, it gave him something solid, something he could believe in. In that moment, Alex made a promise to himself. No matter how messy this got, no matter how deep the pain ran, he would be there for his children. He would shield them, guide them, and make sure they never felt the fallout of their mother's choices. Rachel might have betrayed him, but he would make sure she never betrayed their kids. They would have at least one parent who was there for them, who loved them unconditionally. But the battle wasn't over. Rachel still didn't know he had discovered the affair. Each day he spent around her felt like a test of his strength, each interaction a reminder of her lies. There were times he wanted to confront her right then and there to tell her everything he knew and watch her face as she realized her secrets were out. But he held back, remembering Lisa's advice to be patient, to take things slowly for the kids' sake. He began quietly preparing for the confrontation, gathering documents, talking to Lisa, and learning everything he could about what his next steps might be. And as he did, he started to feel a shift within himself. It was subtle, like a small ember of strength rekindling in a sea of ashes. He was still broken, still hurt, but he was also determined. This pain, this betrayal would not define him or his children. Each day he reminded himself of what truly mattered: Jordan and Emma, their future, and his commitment to being the best father he could be. And he realized that even if the road ahead was long and difficult, he wasn't walking it alone. He had his children, his memories, and a new sense of purpose. Alex knew the confrontation with Rachel couldn't wait much longer. Every day he held back felt like he was slowly unraveling, a wound that just wouldn't heal. He tried to go through the motions of everyday life, but the resentment kept growing, filling him with a mix of anger, sadness, and strangely guilt. It wasn't his fault, yet he felt as if he failed somehow by trusting her. And now he knew he needed to face her, to get the truth straight from the one person who had upended his world. The night he finally confronted her, it was quiet in the house. The kids were at a friend's place, and the silence felt heavy, almost stifling. Rachel sat across from him, her expression guarded, as if she could sense what was coming. Alex took a deep breath, steadying himself before he spoke, his words coming out low but steady. "Rachel, I know about you and Mark. I know what's been going on for years. I know everything." For a moment, she didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at him, her face pale. And then, to his disbelief, she started to defend herself. "It's not what you think, Alex," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mark and I, it was business, nothing personal. It's just complicated." He could barely believe his ears. Business? He felt a surge of anger rise up, but he pushed it back, determined to keep his voice steady. "Rachel, I have photos. I have documents. I know it's been 9 years. 9 years, Rachel. You can't explain that away as business. You betrayed me, you betrayed our family, and now you're trying to downplay it?" Her face twisted, a mix of guilt and defensiveness, but she couldn't meet his gaze. She tried to say something, but he cut her off. "Look, I'm not here to listen to excuses. I trusted you. Our kids trusted you. And now you've left us all in a mess because you couldn't be honest." There was a silence, thick and heavy, as he let his words sink in. Rachel tried once more, this time with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, Alex. I never wanted this to happen. I didn't mean for it to get so complicated." He wanted to feel something for her in that moment, some shred of compassion, some piece of understanding. But all he felt was emptiness, a hollow space where his love and trust had once been. "It's too late for apologies, Rachel. You had years to stop this, to come clean, to make a different choice. But you didn't." And with that, he got up, walked away, and left her sitting there alone, her apology lingering in the silence. In the days that followed, Alex felt a strange sense of relief mixed with a heavy sadness. Confronting Rachel had given him some closure, but it hadn't erased the pain or the betrayal. He knew he needed to protect himself and his kids, to make sure their future wasn't caught up in Rachel's lies and recklessness. So, on Lisa's recommendation, he sought out an attorney, someone who could help him make sense of the legal days ahead. Her name was Maria Lopez. a no-nonsense attorney with a reputation for handling cases like his with both strength and compassion. From the moment he met her, Alex felt a sense of reassurance. Maria listened patiently as he laid out everything, the affair, the lies, the impact on their family. And when he was done, she leaned forward, her expression calm but firm. Alex, I want you to understand something, she began. This situation is painful, and I can't imagine what you're going through. But my job now is to protect you and your kids. You're doing the right thing by getting help, by not rushing into this. We're going to proceed carefully, and we're going to make sure your children's well-being is our top priority. Her words were exactly what he needed to hear. For the first time in weeks, Alex felt like he had someone on his side, someone who could guide him through the fog of anger and confusion. Maria advised him to gather all relevant financial records, documentation, and anything that might be important if this turned into a custody battle. We need to make sure your children are safe and stable, especially with everything they're about to go through, she said. And that means making decisions with a clear head, not out of anger or hurt. That advice stuck with him. Every instinct in him wanted to fight, to make Rachel feel the same pain she had caused him. But Maria's calm approach reminded him of what was really at stake. His children's lives were going to be affected by this, and he couldn't let his anger cloud his judgment. As the days went on, Alex began to feel a shift. He was no longer just a man betrayed. He was a father protecting his kids, preparing for a battle that, in the end, wasn't just about him. He pored over the documents, working late into the night, determined to secure a stable future for Jordan and Emma. And with every page he reviewed, every plan he made, he felt a new strength, a resilience that came not from revenge, but from the love he had for his children. The divorce papers were drafted, and Maria planned for them to be served in a way that would leave no room for denial. Rachel would receive them, and this time she would be with Mark. It was a small detail, but one that Alex hoped would drive home the impact of her choices. He wasn't trying to hurt her, but he wanted her to see, really see, the family she had thrown away. When the day finally arrived, Alex waited in his attorney's office, his heart pounding as Maria finalized the last details. As the papers were served, he could almost feel the weight of the past few weeks lifting, a small measure of justice taking root. Rachel was devastated, he heard later, but he didn't feel satisfaction in her pain. Instead, he felt a sad relief, a sense that he was finally closing a chapter that had been festering for years. And as he walked out of Maria's office, Alex knew that his life was going to be different from here on out. There was no going back, no fixing what Rachel had broken. But he also knew he had something worth fighting for, a future worth rebuilding for himself and for his children. Alex had prepared himself for the worst, but the days after the divorce papers were served were more exhausting than he'd ever imagined. Rachel had been shocked when she received them, and though she tried to convince him that things could still be fixed, he knew there was no turning back. Her words, her apologies, her promises to try harder were just echoes now, hollow, empty, too late. It wasn't about him anymore, it was about his kids, Jordan and Emma. They were his focus, his reason to push through the pain and bitterness. The love he had for them was his guiding light, and he would do whatever it took to protect them, even if it meant going through a long, difficult battle. So, with Maria's help, he began the legal process of pursuing full custody. Alex knew this wouldn't be easy. Courts don't just hand out full custody, especially not when both parents are present and willing to fight. But he also knew that Rachel's actions had already shown how unstable and careless she could be. She had neglected them for years, lying about her whereabouts, putting their health and safety at risk. And now, he was ready to fight. Not out of revenge, but out of love for his children and a need to give them a stable, healthy environment. As he worked through the legal process, Alex's days became a blur of paperwork, meetings, and late nights trying to gather every detail that would strengthen his case. He went through their family finances, his work history, and even documented his role in the children's lives. From being the one who took them to school, attended their soccer games, and stayed up late helping with homework, Alex wanted it all on record. He was their anchor, their constant, and he would continue to be that no matter what. But Rachel didn't back down. She hired her own lawyer, and though she refused to admit her mistakes to Alex, she was ready to argue her case in court. She wanted joint custody, claiming that her relationship with Mark had been a mistake, but that she was still a good mother. Alex could hardly believe it. After everything, after all the lies and betrayals, she still thought she could keep an equal place in their children's lives. One afternoon, Maria called Alex into her office, her expression serious but calm. She laid out the reality of the situation, explaining how custody battles often work. The court will consider everything, Alex, she said gently. They'll look at both parents' roles in the children's lives, their well-being, and who can provide the most stable environment. But we have a strong case, and I believe in it. Her words gave Alex strength, a small reassurance that he wasn't fighting alone. They were building the case based on the stability and love he'd shown his kids, his presence in their daily lives, and the risks Rachel had brought into their family. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but with Maria's help, he felt a small, steady confidence growing within him. As the court dates approached, Alex spent more time preparing, reviewing every detail, every statement, every photograph that showed his role in his kids' lives. And yet, amid all the preparation, he couldn't ignore the emotional toll it was taking on him. The weight of it all, the betrayal, the anger, the endless meetings and preparations, sometimes felt too much to bear. But every time he felt himself wavering, he'd look at Jordan and Emma, and his resolve would harden. For them, he would keep going. On the day of the custody hearing, Alex walked into the courtroom with a sense of purpose. His heart was pounding, but he held his head high, determined to present his truth. Rachel was there too, looking nervous and somber, her lawyer by her side. They both spoke about their roles in the children's lives, and though Alex stayed calm, each word Rachel said felt like a punch. She talked about her love for Jordan and Emma, her desire to keep a family bond, and for a moment he felt a surge of anger. How could she say those words after everything she'd done? When it was his turn, Alex spoke about his commitment to his children, how he had always been there for them, and how he would continue to be. He shared his fears about Rachel's instability, her history of deceit, and how her choices had affected their family. Every word he spoke came from the heart, not a place of anger, but of protection. He wanted the court to see what he saw, a family that needed stability, a future that required trust and safety. In the end, after days of hearings and endless discussions, the court ruled in Alex's favor. He was granted primary custody, with Rachel receiving limited visitation rights. When he heard the decision, a weight lifted from his shoulders. It wasn't that he wanted to win. It was about knowing that his children would be safe, that he could give them the security and stability they deserved. Rachel was devastated, but she didn't fight the ruling. Perhaps she knew deep down that this was the only outcome that made sense. She had made choices that couldn't be undone, choices that had broken the trust of the family they once had. In the days following the ruling, Alex focused on creating a new normal for his kids. It wasn't easy. They had questions, confusion, and a sadness that weighed on their young hearts. He didn't have all the answers, but he promised them one thing. He would be there no matter what. He would give them the love, the support, and the stability they needed to heal. It was a promise he intended to keep, no matter how hard the road ahead might be. After the custody battle, Alex thought he would finally feel some peace, maybe even relief. He had fought so hard to protect his kids, and he had succeeded. But the victory felt bittersweet. His family was forever changed, and though he had won the right to create a stable life for Jordan and Emma, he was still left with the heavy burden of what Rachel's betrayal had done to him, to all of them. For a while, he simply went through the motions, trying to build a new routine. Mornings were the hardest. He'd wake up early to make breakfast, make sure the kids were ready for school, and drive them himself whenever he could. He wanted them to feel his presence, to know that he was there, even in the smallest moments. But he also struggled with his own loneliness, the quiet nights when the kids were asleep, and the memories of the life he thought he had would creep back in, leaving him with that hollow ache. One evening, after he put the kids to bed, he found himself sitting in the living room, going over the past few months in his mind. The pain, the betrayal, the anger, it all felt so raw even now. He could see Rachel's face, the apologies she'd offered, the broken promises, the life they once shared. Part of him felt foolish for having trusted her so completely, for believing in a love that, in the end, had been one-sided. But as he sat there, lost in thought, he felt a shift. A subtle change that had been growing inside him for weeks but was only now surfacing. He realized he didn't want to live in the past anymore. He didn't want to be defined by the pain and betrayal. His kids deserved a father who was present, who was focused on the future, not trapped in the shadows of the past. They had already been through enough. He couldn't let his own heartache cloud their new beginning. The next day, Alex made a choice. He decided to invest in his own healing, not just for his kids, but for himself. He reached out to a therapist, someone recommended by Maria, and began the process of working through the layers of anger, grief, and betrayal. At first, it felt strange, opening up to a stranger, sharing his most painful experiences. But over time, he found comfort in the process. He learned to let go of the guilt, to forgive himself for not seeing the signs, and to stop blaming himself for Rachel's choices. She had made her own decisions, and those choices were hers to bear, not his. Through therapy, Alex started finding pieces of himself that he had lost along the way. He began to reconnect with old friends, to focus on hobbies he had once loved, and even took up new activities with the kids. He and Jordan started playing soccer at the park on weekends, and Emma, always curious and creative, loved their little baking sessions on Saturday mornings. Slowly, life began to feel a bit lighter. It wasn't perfect, and he still had moments of sadness, but he was starting to feel like himself again. One day, out of the blue, Rachel reached out, asking if they could meet. She said she wanted to talk, to apologize, to try to make amends. Alex wasn't sure what to feel. He had done so much work to move forward, to create a safe, stable world for his kids. But part of him wanted to hear her out, to see if maybe this time her apology would feel real. So he agreed, meeting her at a quiet cafe one afternoon while the kids were at school. Rachel looked different, almost like a shadow of the person he'd known. She seemed nervous, remorseful, and when she spoke, her voice was soft, almost fragile. "Alex," she began, "I know I've hurt you in ways that I can never fully repair. I'm sorry. I wish I could go back. I could change everything I did." He listened, letting her words wash over him, but he didn't feel the anger he had expected. Instead, he felt a calm acceptance, a sense of closure that he hadn't known he needed. "Rachel," he replied, his voice steady, "I appreciate your apology. I do. But what's done is done. I can't forget what happened, and I don't think I'll ever fully understand it. But I need to move forward for myself and for the kids. They deserve a future that isn't haunted by the past." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and he could see that she finally understood. They parted ways that day with an understanding that, while they shared a history, their paths were now separate. Alex felt a weight lift, a feeling that he could truly begin to move on. In the months that followed, Alex focused on building a new life. He threw himself into his role as a father, finding joy in the little moments with Jordan and Emma. He even began dating again, cautiously at first, but with a sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew he had a long way to go, that trust would take time, but he also knew that he was ready to welcome new possibilities, to open his heart to a future that wasn't defined by betrayal. The healing process wasn't a straight line. There were days when he'd feel the sting of the past, nights when he'd lie awake, remembering the pain. But each time, he'd remind himself of the life he was building, the future he was creating for his kids. He was learning to live with the scars, to accept that while they would always be part of him, they didn't have to control him. Looking back, Alex saw how far he'd come. The man he was now was different, stronger, wiser, more resilient. He had faced a darkness he hadn't thought he could survive. And yet here he was, rebuilding piece by piece. And as he watched his children laugh, as he listened to Emma's endless stories or watched Jordan's budding sense of humor, he felt a warmth that made everything worth it. For the first time in a long time, Alex felt hopeful. Life was still full of challenges, and there would be hard days ahead, but he was no longer walking alone in the shadows. He had his kids, his resilience, and a future waiting to be embraced. And as he sat on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky, he felt at peace. He had survived. He had healed. And he was ready, ready to move forward, to create a life full of trust, love, and laughter. A life where he and his kids could finally feel safe, whole, and free. As Alex sat in the quiet of his home, a warmth settled over him, a feeling he hadn't known in a long time. The journey he'd been on, the betrayal, the heartache, and the fight to reclaim his family's stability, it had all changed him. But for the first time, he could see that change wasn't only about loss. It had also given him something he hadn't expected, a sense of peace, of knowing that he had come out stronger. The kids were finally finding their rhythm again. Jordan was thriving, his laughter filling the house in a way that had been missing for too long. Emma was growing up so quickly, her eyes sparkling with a confidence that made Alex proud. They had weathered this storm together, and while it had been painful, it had brought them closer. They were healing as a family, finding joy in the simple things, sharing meals, laughing over silly jokes, going on weekend trips. And as Alex looked at them, he realized something important. The person he was now, the father he had become, wouldn't trade these moments for anything. He had been forced to dig deep, to find strength in places he didn't know he had. And he had emerged from it with a renewed commitment to his family, to building a future that wasn't just about surviving, but truly living. Rachel remained a part of their lives, of course, and while things were still fragile, he had come to accept her role. She was the kids' mother, and despite everything, they loved her. He had come to terms with the fact that his relationship with her was no longer a battle, but a shared commitment to Jordan and Emma's happiness. Their co-parenting was polite, civil, even amicable, though the wounds of the past were still there, fake scars that reminded him of how far he'd come. Through it all, he had learned to let go of the anger. Forgiveness, he realized, wasn't about excusing her actions or forgetting what had happened. It was about freeing himself from the weight of it. He'd done his best to be the father his kids deserved, the friend his family needed, and the man he wanted to be. He had healed, not by denying the pain, but by facing it, letting it shape him into someone who could find strength in vulnerability. One evening, as he and the kids were gathered on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange, Jordan looked up at him and said, "Dad, I'm glad we're here. I know it's been tough, but I feel like everything's going to be okay." In that moment, Alex felt his heart swell with gratitude. He knew that they still had challenges ahead, that life would bring its own ups and downs. But for the first time, he truly believed that they would be okay. He had fought for this, earned it. And now he was living it. A life rebuilt, not around betrayal and pain, but around trust, love, and resilience. As he wrapped his arm around his kids, Alex knew one thing for certain. Life would go on, and they would go on together. They had faced the hardest parts, found their way through the darkness, and now they stood on the other side, ready to embrace whatever came next. In the end, it wasn't just about moving on. It was about rebuilding, creating a new life rooted in trust, a life where they could all finally feel safe and whole. And as the last light faded from the sky, Alex smiled, feeling a deep peace settle within him. They were free, and for the first time in a long time, the future felt bright.